Hello, and welcome to our eighth Digital Badge Academy webcast. As usual standard, I'm going to hand it over to David Leeser to introduce our special guest. So, David, over to you.
Yeah, we have a great guest today, Margo Griffith from Edalex. And Margo has a long history in education and technology. And she is the lead, I guess, business development manager or lead for Edalex, right? And and really a passion for how do we start to improve the value of digital badges through interoperability and equivalence. I think that's really the main thing we're going to talk about today.
So, perhaps I'll kick it off with the question. Why don't we just start with something fairly simple here, Margo? We'll go easy on you at first, and we'll save the tougher questions for later on. But why don't you just tell our audience here, give them a little bit of information about yourself, your background, what you're doing at Edalex, what Edalex is involved in. Just kind of give us that overview.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, wonderful to be here. Thank you for, having me talk about, you're right, my passion. And Edalex is an Australian, I guess, educational technology company, although I've kind of been doing edtech slash skills tech because it probably more accurately reflects what we're doing. For me, I've been, and we won't say how many decades, in the education business. Most of it was really, with what we would call publishers in the day, McGraw-Hill and most recently Cengage. And it was in the digital platform side of things. My introduction into the world of digital credentials, and I won't say competency-based education because we've had that here in Australia for about 40 years, but really that notion around digitizing and recognizing our achievements came through working actually with Deb Everhart when we were both at Cengage, and people like John Mott. And it was, a wonderful introduction for me. And so, following on from that Cengage experience, I really wanted to stay in the area, and ended up with Edalex exploring this wonderful world together. So Edalex is kind of got a quirky history. One of the platforms started off life in Tasmania. There's not a lot of ed tech that comes out of Tasmania, to be perfectly frank. And so I would consider us, little unicorns in that way. Um, and it was with the Aquila product, and Aquila got bought by Pearson. Pearson ended up divesting about 7 years ago, and the directors did a management buyout at that stage. Open Aquila got turned open source, so that's one of the things that we do. We manage the Open Aquila platform on a global basis. We develop it, we host it, we service it. So that's kind of that. I'll put that to one side because it becomes important when we start talking about one of our other platforms, OpenRSD, because OpenRSD is built on the tool set that is Open Aquila. So we'll revisit that, Jim, for you. And one of the other platforms that we do have, which I guess is pertinent to our conversation today, is Credentialate. That started out from actually a multi-year research project at one of the big group of 8 universities here, like a research intensive university here. That research project was looking at how do we surface, I guess, what they were calling soft skills back in those days from the undergraduate medical curriculum. They could do the knowledge really well, and they were doing a fabulous job, but most of the learners there were thinking that they were going to be doctors. And in fact, 20% were going to be doctors, 80% were going to be something completely different. And so they needed a way to rise and make visible all the skills that they are developing through their undergraduate medical curriculum, so that they could take those forth into other roles that weren't specifically medical. So Credentialate was actually born out of that research project. I'll stop there because I've said a lot of words. You may have questions.
I guess maybe to amplify on that, because I think that what you're doing right now couldn't be more timely. because we're really starting to focus on human capabilities, because those are the things that are the most lasting in this technological change. I mean, these liquid skills of technology are changing every 6 months to a year, but those human capabilities are the things that are durable. And so maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if that's part of your mission, is being able to capture those human capabilities that really prepare people for the future and companies for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that Credentialate does, and obviously it's evolved since its I guess origins in that research project, they have a very, end-to-end deliverable. What we were, as part of that project, we were just thinking, there's something in this, right? There are so many, not just graduates, right? There are so many people who actually don't have the confidence to express their skills, whether that's through a formal learning process or whether that's, informal or non-formal. The skill validation and the skill visibility is vital. And so we thought, let's dig into this some more. Let's see what we can do around this. So Credentialate, think of us kind of as a skills plumbers, right? We sit between the evidence of learning, and that could be in a learning management system, or it could be in a work integrated learning platform or an assessment platform, or it could be your lived experience. And we take that data and we map it to skills and competencies within Credentialate. We also felt it important to have a benchmark, the ability to benchmark those skills against what's important, right? What does it mean? We've got to add some meaning to this. And so we also have the ability to align to frameworks. And all of that data we produce in what we call a personal evidence record. A lot of the time when we're talking about digital credentials, we're still actually only talking about the credential itself, right? The outcome. And the criteria applies to everybody that's got that credential. But we wanted to know what the personal evidence was, right? What's your personal capabilities? What's your personal performance, as it relates to this competency or this credential that you are being awarded? And how do I compare it, kind of against others? And so this personal evidence record really takes all that metadata that we've gathered, the evidence, I guess, and presents it in a way that is, or could be, a verifiable credential in and of itself. But mostly we put it into the metadata of a digital badge, so it has that portability and shareability. So yeah, we're very passionate around what sits underneath digital credentials. What can we do about the transparency of the data and expose that to the ecosystem?
Am I understanding correctly that, let's say I have a badge, but it doesn't have the kind of context that something like Credentialate could bring to it, but the badge that I have could be matched or married up with that kind of information from Credentialate, and then the combination of the two could result in a new badge that Credentialate would. Am I hearing or understanding that correctly?
Potentially, but more importantly, we would like to do the end to end. So a retrospective fit could happen, actually, but because the badge that has been issued is kind of immutable,
Right.
going back and tampering with that is not.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't happen, and if it does, then that whole tamper evident becomes a moot point. And so, yeah, what we do is we actually work with badging agents. We don't really mind who we work with. We work with all of them, right? Because it's literally just using the metadata field, the evidence field that's already there. And so we have a good working relationship, with most of the badging agents. We could do it internally too. We have the ability to issue internally if someone doesn't already have a badging agent. We're also working on the notion that, particularly with the Open Badges 3.0 standard and a lot of the work around verifiable credentials, that the evidence record itself could stand alone and be passed straight through into a digital wallet or a learner employment record if required.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So how does this all tie together? So if you think, I'm just trying to think of how the flow works with what you do and how it provides value. Basically, you're capturing this information, and it could be from, like you said, from all these different various sources. And is there kind of like a translation then, or how does that, is it translated into these skills and then captured, or?
Yeah, yeah. So there is a mapping process that does
Uh-huh.
have to happen. And that's still human work at this point in time.
Hmm.
The AI will catch up
Right.
100%, but we're working on that clearly. Um, but at the moment, because we're working largely with unstructured data,
Right.
it's not there yet.
Hmm.
So we're hoping, you know, at the not too distant future, and the way that AI is, of course, rapidly changing, that we can at least take away some of that human work around the skills mapping. But at the moment, it's still there.
Hmm.
Um, and so we see that, yeah, as a friction point at the moment. The data that exists still does have to be mapped within Credentialate. Coming back to OpenRSD, we were part of the collaborative projects for the Open Skills Network this time last year, actually, or the beginning of last year. And we started that really to look into data schema for skills. What is this thing? You know, how could it work for us, particularly in an Australian context? We started getting into that with one of our partners, University of Melbourne, and realized that there was a lot more to it that we could explore and expand. Particularly, there was a lot more to it because we had 20 something years of Open Aquila toolsets sitting behind us. That's 20 years of metadata experience. And so we built out OpenRSD for a couple of reasons. Number one, to service the international market because we needed fields that were more flexible. We wanted to introduce the concept of rich skill descriptors to our existing customer base for Open Aquila to make that transition easier. And we also wanted the ability to embed more context at the skill level within Credentialate. And so that's what we do. When we take the data and we map it in Credentialate, we use the skill definitions of OpenRSD. So therefore, we've also got another explosion of linked data and context to bring to the skills. So more transparency around the skills, the skill definitions, and what they mean.
Can I ask you just to follow up on that real quick? Because a lot of people listening don't understand what OpenRSD is or Open Skills Network. Could you kind of give a quick primer on what they are and why people should care?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Open Skills Network started in the US, although there are many international partners. It really came around from this notion of having a common language that we share. Any kind of trust and transparency and communication in any relationship starts with having a common language and being able to talk, you know, to the same thing. And so the Open Skills Network are a coalition of industry and employers and edtech and educational institutions and military and, you know, everyone really that's involved in the skills ecosystem in some way, looking to create a way to share and make transparent skills data that is both human readable, but more importantly, machine readable. Because as we charge into the future, we actually have to have a way to move the data through the systems. And we know through Sean Gallagher's work, you know, recently in Northwestern, that actually at the moment, a lot of that data is not being passed through. So even though we're doing wonderful work at the digital credential end, you know, at the education and training end, that data is not actually getting through any of the systems to where it's intended to be for talent acquisition in industry. So yeah, moving the data in a machine readable way is super important.
Yeah, the rich skill descriptors, and it's it's been somewhat recently that I was doing some research and I started looking at what the Open Skills Network um, has been doing, and I ran across the rich skill descriptor information, started reading that. That led me to Edalex and seeing your all's involvement. And I have to say, a light went off in my head when I started looking at this, because one of the challenges, and this comes from, experience of running an actual badging program, a very large one, like I did for about 7 years at IBM, which David and I both were responsible for getting that program up and running. Um, One of the big challenges was when it came to trying to articulate someone's skills, right? There would be a field where you could put in skill tags, which were just keywords. And I think one of the examples I saw through the Open Skills Network and some of that research I was doing, it was showing, and I've seen this in practice where someone might put in SQL as a skill, but that's so nebulous. Right? It's like, so what? What does that really mean? And then I saw the rich skill descriptor library related to that. And I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was 2 or 3 dozen different um, variations on the application of SQL. It may have not been that many, but it was quite a few. And to your point earlier, it really brought home that idea of bringing context to something and taking the ambiguity out of it. And I think that that's probably, one of the most valuable things I've seen in a long time. So there's a question here, and that is, will OpenRSD be working on expanding the available rich skill descriptor libraries? I mean, kind of what's the go forward plan in terms of what Edalex will be doing, or even what work might be taking place specific to OSN? Maybe you can kind of give us a glimpse of the future around that.
Yeah, absolutely. OpenRSD we did as a give back to the community. It's free and open and everyone can use it. So please, if you're listening to this, go and explore openrsd.com. It
I did not realize that.
oh,
So there's no cost to use OpenRSD.
no, we absolutely did it as a give back to the community to, I guess, kickstart. So let me backtrack a little bit. The Open Skills Management tool that OSN use is an open source piece of code that people can stand up to create and share and store the rich skill descriptors. For us, in an international context, the fields that they created were very, and dare I say it, US centric. And so we had to look at a way that was actually literally the impetus. We said, oh gosh, we actually can't use this. So we looked at, what we could do, and again, had that light bulb moment, Jim, of going, well, we've got 20 years of metadata experience. Let's see what we can stand up. So yeah, it was literally a give back to the community to say, here it is. All the fields are, in terms of what you put in, what you link to. And for instance, Ultimate links to ONET. Now we don't use ONET. We use ANSCO codes. If you're in Europe, you'll use ESCO. We just don't use it. We also needed the ability to bring in other metadata fields as well. And so, yeah, it's literally there and available. Now, it will integrate with OSMA instances. So that integration piece is available. So yes, we can import, and in fact, we've imported the Western Governors University RSDs that they've made publicly available. So they're all in there. We've got Education Design Labs RSDs, they're all in there. And in fact, we can do that integration piece with any either OSMA instance, or of course we can do it with any libraries you create within OpenRSD.
What's the difference between this and a taxonomy or the different taxonomies that are out there?
Yeah, good question. I just think that RSDs provide the ability to put a lot of those skills taxonomies into what has some utility around it, right?
Context. I
don't know about the US, but certainly in Australia, we love a good framework. We have many of them. We are built around it. The government spends a lot of money and it has done beautiful work in creating both digital capability frameworks. We have an Australian skills classification system. That's all been done. we also have 40 years of competency-based education where we have locked behind a website called training.gov.au all of the units of competency across all of the different training packages. So we are not short on data. We have got data to burn, particularly in Australia. What it is, it's locked in PDFs, it's locked behind spreadsheets, which is just not very useful. And so RSDs offer the ability to take that data and give it some context and some interoperability and also some machine readability, right? And so we can also link into things like Credential Engine, right, through CTDL. We can, within a field in your RSDs, you can link back out into CTDL, using CTDL into Credential Engine and have that linkage as well. So coming back and referencing some of, Deb's Everhart's work and Credential Engine's work, that open linked data is absolutely vital. And so we have to take every opportunity to make sure that we're providing that transparency and linkage. And OpenRSD and RSD's rich skill descriptors, the schema that it is, allows for that.
I'll make sure that there are links here that so people can go and read about it. I know that's, it's one of the most encouraging developments that I've seen, I think, in the entire time that I've worked in the digital credentialing space. So I'm very, very anxious to see it get traction and see it get adopted in a broad way. So you have a champion in front of you right now. So
Appreciate that,
very
Jim.
enamored with it. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question about that though. So basically, who is using it right now, and what are the benefits that they're seeing from it?
Right. It's a really good question. It's only going to have utility if people are using it and they're feeding back either to us or into OSN around how it's going to work. How do we need to modify this? What are the use cases for it? In our context, one of the end-to-end applications, which I'm really excited about, is with the University of Melbourne. And so in their MSpace, which is the Melbourne Professional and Continuing Education School, so post-professionals, right? They were partners exploring RSDs and really looked and honed in on the way to connect what they're doing in terms of micro-credential creation or microcerts, as they call it, and the industries that they build them for. And so they felt that whilst they were issuing digital badges, it wasn't really conveying to the learners everything that they've learned and also why it was important. And so what they do now is that when they're building out their microcerts, they sit down with industry and they create their rich skill descriptor library, their RSD libraries. So they have a shared language to start with. And that RSD library then influences the content development, the assessments, and obviously the identification of the skills. And so when the learners go through their Melbourne microcerts and they get their digital badge at the end, embedded in that is the personal evidence record with all of their skills and the alignments, why it's important. And so I think that that's a really exciting use case. I mean, they're just starting. I think they've done about 6 of them now. They're just starting this programming and getting their processes up and running. But I'll say one of the things we wanted to do with Credentialate, and now clearly with OpenRSD, is to scale this. So there are pockets of innovation like University of Melbourne and others doing this amazing work, but it's really hard to scale. And so we actually do need the technology enablement sitting underneath it to get the scale, to amplify the disruptions, to get that paradigm shift that we're all seeking, right? And so that's why I'm passionate about it. And I'm passionate about the technology or the place that technology plays in all of this. Sorry, I've gone off on another rant. You can,
but the other part of it is that what I liked about what they're doing there is that they're finally and I don't know if we don't see a lot of this in a lot of areas of the world, where they're actually creating kind of bespoke programs or credential programs that align to industry. And so it does then require then, of course, that the industry then gets their job descriptions right. So that has to be matched with the Open RSD as well, right?
That's your utility piece, right? Imagine if we could create job descriptions using this shared language, this
Yeah.
common language. And then, and I know there are platforms doing this. I don't think they're doing it around RSDs, but you can create your own resume using that. So, once we have this shared language and we have it in a machine readable way, then the utility piece can be built around it. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. Getting it to a point where everyone can use it. And so it becomes commonplace within the ecosystem, that more transparency is placed around, what I can do. Let me show you what I can do. I'll be way more confident to talk about that in a hiring situation if I've got the evidence with me. And you'll be trustful that I can do it if I've got the evidence in front of me as well, right? So transparency and trust, they just go hand in glove. There's no way of getting around it.
To me, that's the future. It has to go in that direction. A while back, I ran across an article that LinkedIn itself had published, and they talked about job postings on their website, and they did a comparison between 2019 and 2020. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have the exact figures, but they spoke in terms of percentages around the number of job postings that had transitioned from kind of the traditional way job postings, were written, where it's, describing a role and things like that, to becoming very, skills centric. We need these skills. You need to be able to do this, and you need to be able to do this, which goes exactly with the question that David just asked in the response that you gave. If you can get employers writing job descriptions in that way, I mean, there's a standard that both sides of that equation could tap into and really bring, I think, some unity between what employers are looking for and what credentials are actually reflecting in terms of the context, through things like rich skill descriptors and that sort of thing. So that's really exciting stuff. And I know it's the whole thing with rich skill descriptors and open RSD is still pretty young, right? I mean, it's not something that's been around very long.
Oh no, like way in its infancy. And I think that's the other thing at the moment, and David and I have spoken about this in previous conversations, is this whole thing is really new. And so we're expecting that there is evidence and reportable results, and that we're ticking all the boxes, and that the risk has been mitigated, that everything's going to work out. We don't know that. This is also new. What we are moving forward on, a number of large assumptions that this is the right thing to do, that there will be inherent value in this, and that we can change the world by doing this, and in fact change the lives of a lot of people, by being able to recognize their skills and validate the skills. So yeah, it's very, very, very new. But as you can hear, I'm pretty passionate.
Well, the thing is about it is you talked a lot, you said this several times, so I know this is a passion for you, is the confidence people get when you're able to describe that. And I think about, and I want to talk about the white paper in just a second, but I've used this before, and talking to people. I went to some nice colleges, and one of the colleges I went to was University of Southern California, and I had a professor named Everett Rogers. He was the premier communications professor, most cited communications professor in the world at the time. He created the diffusion of innovation theory, which became, crossing the chasm with Jeffrey Moore, and everybody has used that to get their products through. And I had a semester with him, and I actually, met with him personally, weekly, literally, because he was very accessible.
Yeah.
And my college diploma doesn't say anything about that. And I have a master's degree is what I have. I don't have a discrete skill tag of some sort, whether it's a badge or certificate or something else, that signals that I know the diffusion of innovation, and I learned from the master at it. So I really have an understanding of that. And so I think you just recently published a white paper on some of the confidence levels, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that once we finally get this thing nailed down and we're able to break down what a person's real capabilities are into something that is resume worthy and future focused and career ready, and then it's expressed through these credentials. What is that? What did you find in your paper?
Yeah, so this was again coming back to that notion of research. We felt that absolutely we have to start building in the efficacy research, from the get-go. This is a small study, but we did it with the University of Melbourne, we did it with the Education Design Lab in the US, and we did it with the University of Dayton. And it was it was an export grant. We got some money from the Victorian government to look at, are we doing, and what our platform, is it effective? We had done, leading up to the research project, a survey of about 1,000 college graduates, and looking at their confidence level around being able to express their skills in a hiring situation. And only 33% felt comfortable in a hiring situation talking to their skills and competencies. I actually thought that was quite high. I expected it to be way, way lower. But taking that result, we said, well, will that increase if we increase the transparency around the credentials that they're receiving? And so that was really the basis of the research that we did, with the grant from the Victorian government and with our partners, University of Melbourne and Education Design Lab and University of Dayton. Will confidence levels for learners increase when placed in a hiring situation? And conversely, will increased transparency on the employer side amplify the signal to hire? So we looked at those two questions. And the result was a resounding yes. Yes, it does. So from 33%, the results of the study was 76% of learners felt that their confidence had increased by presenting them with a personal evidence record that went with their digital badge. I should say that the cohort that we used were used to getting digital badges, right? So that was their standard. So it wasn't really a new concept for them. We were just adding a layer to see if that actually helped their confidence level.
I want to kind of switch gears a little bit because I have a sort of a pre-made question I wanted to get into. So I'm going to switch gears here just a little bit. You have written about in the past about the unbundling of education and what it means. And I would love for you to expand on that and give our audience an overview of what that's about, if you could. What do you mean by unbundling of education?
Yeah, interesting word. I guess I don't mean it in the way that people might think, and that's breaking down existing courses or programs or content. For me, it was more unbundling across sectors. If we're talking about formal education sectors, let's break it down across, K-12, and for us in Australia, vocational and higher education. But let's also break it down from not all learning needs to be formal, right? There's a lot of non-formal and informal learning out there that actually has to be recognized and validated. It started off, the thinking started off from a very good friend, Jeffrey Lehrer, who heads up Scouts Australia. And we started talking about the content and the learning that happens within Scouts, but not just Scouts, but those big 6 youth organizations. And in Australia, I'd add another 2 to the big 6 in Surf Lifesaving Australia and Duke of Edinburgh. Now, that is structured, non-formal learning that is amazing. It's just amazing. The skills that if you are, let's take surf lifesaving. My daughters did surf lifesaving. Most, kids in Australia do it at least for a little while because we have to learn to survive in our surf. But what you learn through that, oh my gosh, right? And it's structured. You progress, through various levels, and you do get recognition for that, but it's not digital. And it's not taken into consideration, in your K-12 transcript. You get a mark at the end at year 12. That's it. No telling, all the rest of the things that you can do. It's the same with Scouts. Their program, that structured non-formal learning that they do is incredible. And so started thinking around, we need to not just unbundle what we've got, but we also do need to start looking beyond just formal education. And so I guess my use of the word unbundling was twofold. It was, let's look wider and let's start getting a little bit more granular. And I think grain size is really important. We can only start to do that kind of unbundling if we get down to the grain size of skills, because then you can start to build it back up. Then you can start with your flexibility. Then those skills can be mapped and aligned in ways that create different paths. And so, yeah, that thinking all started from, those kind of conversations. But I really think that that's the basis of it, right? If we get it down to the appropriate grain size, then we can start to build back up different, pathways, networks, and not just in formal education, but across all learning.
Well, I was going to say real quick on that one, because you mentioned two different things, and we'll come back to the granular level, maybe, Jim. But I spoke at a conference, a military conference on digital badges, and one of the top career counselors in Washington was there. And she said, we've been telling our, the servicemen that are leaving, servicemen and women that are leaving the military, that they need to go back to college. It's like, but they have all this prior learning. They have all this life experience. They really are probably, they could test out of half of the degree or more, and they probably don't need the degree anyway. They probably need a certificate program. So I'm really big on the whole idea of assessment to be able to, in fact, I don't know if you know George Westerman from MIT, but I met with him and I was talking about hiring MIT graduates. MIT is a very respectable school, one of the best in the world, right? And he said, but I wouldn't hire one of my graduates without having them do an assessment. He says, because I would want to know very specifically if they have the capabilities that I need for the job. The degree doesn't really, it's a great thing. But what you're saying, though, is really, first of all, it removes a lot of the burden from the systems that basically are saying you have to go back to school and you have to spend all of this time doing things that you already know, that you have life learning experience or private learning on this thing. It reduces the cost of doing that. It gets people into a career that they're going to love a lot more quickly. And so I'm wondering, again, I think that that's another area that could use what your rich skills descriptors on the assessment. It's not just badges, but it's the assessments, and it's on the assessments, it's on the learning, it's on the signal of achievement, whatever that happens to be, and then it's on the actual job, right? I mean, there's all these areas have to be glued together.
100%, David. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Yes, that is exactly what needs to happen. And assessment is the key, actually. And being able to do that in an authentic manner. Yeah, I want to show you what I can do. And my degree and my certifications don't actually signal that to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And also when we're talking about unbundling, sorry, just coming back to that word because you've got me thinking, Jim, why did I use that? We also, I was talking at that stage around education, but I think the same needs to happen at the work. We need to unbundle the work from the job. And so, moving forward, my job description does not define what I do. I do, and if you're listening, Dan, I do way more than my job description. No, we shouldn't let the job description define what we do, right? We need to unbundle the job from the work.
Mm-hmm.
And once we do that, then we can start all of the things that are currently in play: project-based work,
Right.
problem-based work, and make those visible to the organization. People need to know that I can tap dance. I can't, but people wouldn't know that, right? You need to make those skills visible.
Right.
So,
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think there has been this tendency for decades, for forever really, to think about someone's education in the context of what they've done on a formal level, to acquire skills and learn things, and gain mastery in that. But there are so many different pathways that someone could go down that could lead to the development of really, really, essential skills, whether it be human skills, life skills, technical skills, job specific, skills at a task level, all of these things, and those accumulate in so many different ways. So I think you're right. That, the unbundling in that context makes perfect sense. And it's interesting. David and I participated in a panel with uh, California Polytechnic Institute. This was a few months back. And one of the
right.
things that they're trying to do in and around a digital badging program that they have been working on for a while is to figure out how to capture that very thing outside the classroom amongst the students. So students, will be attending class, but then they may have a job, right, to help make ends meet, to pay for, the apartment they're sharing with, two or three other students
Yep.
and that kind of thing, and to be able to eat and all those good things. And they're saying, why wouldn't we be as interested in what they're gaining in the way of skills, doing that as the skills they're learning in the classroom. So I think others are starting to think about this. It's interesting. I think you're way out on the leading edge, though, of this in terms of really articulating the value and what it means. So I suspect we'll see and hear a lot more about this kind of thing as we move forward.
Yeah, I really hope so. One of the things that we're investigating, both on the technological level, but also just on another level, is this notion that skills are not static either, right? We don't just have a skill and that suddenly, we've acquired this skill. It's a progression. It's a progression towards acquiring that skill.
Mhm.
And then it doesn't stay there. Like, you acquire other skills that maybe are adjacent to that skill. So, we from a technology and from a digital sense, being able to both recognize progression towards, the mastery of a particular skill, but also what does that look like in terms of transferability and adjacency to other skills. So they're all the things that we're tossing around at the moment too. We haven't got answers for that just yet. Although, to be honest, we do have an answer for the progression. We're working with a high school, a performing arts high school, and we are actually recognizing and digitizing their curriculum. But we're not just digitizing their curriculum, it's the cross curricular, so all of those durable skills, and the co-curricular stuff as well. The Duke of Edinburgh awards, the Surf Life Saving, the Scouts. And what we are doing there is using the personal evidence record as a provisional badge, right? And so it's not baked. We don't bake it into a badge just then, but we have the visibility through a dashboard so that learners, teachers, parents can see 24/7 where where the student is up to. And then once they reach their level of attainment that they have, whether that's mastery level or anything moving up towards that, they can then use that badge to go get a job in year 9, or they can use it to represent what they have done and know as they move on to further learning. So yeah, we're exploring that notion of progression, really carefully.
Yeah, you said something too that I know resonated with David, and it does for me as well. And that's when you talked about skills aren't static and
Yeah.
adjacent skills. Skills adjacency and skills fluidity are
Mm.
Obviously two very real things that I think have to be taken into account. And I know 110% David agrees with that. Um,
Right.
I think it's also really, I think it's very wise the work that you're doing with the, K through 12 kind of thing. And, it reminded me of something when my son was back in high school, um, his senior year, the county decided to add a middle school, an engineering oriented middle school
Mhm.
program at the high school. And so middle school students would have to qualify to attend, but literally, introducing middle schoolers to engineering disciplines from an education standpoint. And I think about, like Microsoft and Google, how they're so aggressive at trying to get in front of students as young as possible right now. Obviously, there's some motivation to, make those big company names top of mind for those individuals as they progress through school. But it's also, something that's in addition to and above and beyond, the kind of the traditional K through 12 education experience. It's like my son came out of high school, Microsoft certified. I mean,
Yeah.
that would have,
Oh, sure.
that wasn't even a concept anybody could think of back when I graduated high school. But so yeah, it's great work that you all are doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So, if you had one piece of advice for people listening to this, what is the one piece of advice or recommendation that they do? Or is there a website or, to get started, what would you say? Where do you start with something like this?
Oh gosh, I have so many pieces of advice, David. But I think the one thing is if you're thinking about a strategy around recognition of learning, now whether that's looking at digital credentials or whatever that recognition mechanism is, digital badges, think about your data architecture as well, because I think people, and it's completely understandable, right? This is still new. Digital badging is still new. Going straight to your digital badge and the recognition piece is important in the short term, but you'll find in the long term, if you actually have both your content and recognition strategy aligned to your digital architecture strategy and making sure that all of those are linked and particularly open, then it will save you pain further down. So I think that would be my one piece of advice. Think of your twin track strategy from the get-go. It will save you the pain at the other end.
That's fantastic. Margo, you're such a thought leader. I really have enjoyed this and in hearing your point of view and
You.
perspective on things, and can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule to
I
sit
love
with
it.
us and talk about these things. So maybe we could have you back again in the future to talk about other things as well. So
Would absolutely love that. Yeah, absolutely love that.
fantastic.
Thank you both. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Okay.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.